Morning. Hey, Diana, can you hear me?
I can.
You might- Okay, perfect. Good to see you. It's good to talk to you again. How
Yeah.
are things going up there in New Hampshire, I believe, or where were we at again?
I'm in Massachusetts outside of Boston. So, but I just got back
Oh,
from LA. I was at the Ancestral Health Symposium at UCLA last week.
oh, okay. Okay, cool. Hopefully it turned out pretty good. Well, anyway, just for the sake of the folks who don't know you, can you just give us a little intro on your background? I think a lot of people know you, but there's maybe some that don't. So if you
Mhm.
don't mind doing that real quick.
Yeah. I am a registered dietitian. I spent the last 18 years living on working farms that were vegetable and pasture raised meat. I wrote the book Sacred Cow with Robb Wolf, and also was the director of the film Sacred Cow, and am a huge defender of the right for everybody to be able to choose animal source foods.
Well, very good, and we appreciate your advocacy. I know I certainly do, and that was an excellent film and book, by the way. I read that and saw that, and so I appreciate you guys did that. And hopefully, many of the folks in the chat have seen that film. If not, I highly encourage you to watch it. It really did. You guys do a really nice job of making a very cogent argument on why we should continue to support animal agriculture included in our diet. You've recently started something new. I can't remember what you call it, some global health initiative. Or I can't remember what you called it. But tell me what that is and what's going on with that. Let's get into that real quick.
Sure. Yes, it's called the Global Food Justice Alliance, and I'm using the words food justice to really push it back on the people who are sort of choosing a quite elitist position in insisting that the world go vegan, or at least dramatically cut down on their meat consumption. So there's this was sparked because the United Nations right now is having some meetings, and there's this diet called the Eat Land Set diet that some of your listeners here might be familiar with, but it was just a brief background on that. This Norwegian billionaire who is nearly vegan. I've heard she's not 100% vegan, but she commissioned Walter Willett and a bunch of others to write sort of the ideal diet moving forward that will not only save our health, but also save the planet. And it only allows for half an ounce of red meat consumption per person per day worldwide. You can eat 1 ounce of chicken, but yet you can have 15 grams of added sugar on this diet. And it is based, of course, on no science. Nutrition science is pretty bad to begin with, but this is all, observational studies. There's nothing that proves cause with meat and disease, as I'm sure all of your community understands. And they actually didn't even consult with any environmental experts on this, but yet there's many references to how this is going to be better for the environment. The Secretary General of the United Nations has taken it upon himself to attack climate change and our food systems. So this particular agenda is not even going through the normal United Nations protocol of voting. So member nations can't vote on this. They don't get a say. And the head of Action Track 2 is actually Miss Norwegian billionaire herself, Gunhild. And so she's in charge of this, along with a few other groups that are also incredibly meat phobic. There's no sort of pro animal source foods people on the agenda there. And they're going to be deciding what diet is going to be officially endorsed by the Secretary General of the United Nations. So although this is not going to be like official mandated policy worldwide, what the United Nations endorses is held up to, it's really seen as a very credible organization. It has a lot of power. Nations that are good, members of the United Nations are expected to move towards this goal. And this also gives a lot more fuel to people who are advocating for less meat in school lunches or no meat in school lunches. We're seeing this in Berkeley, California right now, where the government's phasing out meat. And so SNAP funding, dietary policies, I mean, this is yet another non-evidence-based piece of information that's going to hit the media, and it's going to spread more to sort of this court of public opinion that meat is killing us and bad for the planet, and that everybody worldwide should be eating less meat. And so the reason I use the word food justice is because I'm really trying to point out that this is a meat-free or a minimal meat diet is a diet for rich white Europeans and Americans. This isn't accessible to most people in the world. People don't necessarily want to cut down on their meat consumption, nor will they thrive, as you know, with less meat. And I'm also pointing out not only, for people who are hungry or food insecure, that they need more meat, but also in countries where people are overfed, like the US, increasing meat consumption, protein consumption is actually a good thing for weight loss. So this is really radical stuff that I'm saying, compared to most dietitians out there. Anyway, so I'm the Global Food Justice Alliance is fighting for the inclusion of animal source foods in our food policies worldwide.
Yeah, Gunhild Storlin, she's been around, we've been hearing about her for a couple of years now, and I think she suffers from an autoimmune disease, I think systemic sclerosis, which incidentally I've seen a lot of success with on animal-based diets. But interestingly, the UN, and you hold them up as an organization that does wield a lot of influence, and they certainly do. I mean, I think many people's faith in the UN has taken a hit over the last few years for various reasons, but it still stands that they do direct and cause a lot of change to happen. So how do you anticipate the Global Food Justice Initiative Alliance? I can't remember. Sorry, I keep messing up the words. But how do you see that going forward? How is that going to impact? Which ways do you hope to achieve an impact so that they can sort of counter this narrative that's based basically on, well, let me go back to this. Gunhild Storlin, they partnered with something, I think it was Fresh or Wellness or something like that. I can't remember what they called themselves, but this was a multinational global group of corporations whose interests go from pharmacy to fertilizer to petrochemicals and so on and so forth. So who else is behind this movement that we might want to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, Frederick Leroy, Leroy, is on Twitter, and he's really, you follow him, I'm sure, Sean. He's really the best one that, has amazing slides showing all the conflicts of interest and all the corporations who are benefiting from this and supporting this initiative. So it's everyone from Beyond Meat and Impossible to major pharmaceutical companies, Barilla, who funds Walter Willett over at Harvard. Although he, says he has no conflict of interest, he absolutely does and has been called out many times for having conflict of interest. And so there's a lot of people who stand to benefit from the vilification of meat and the idea that we all need to be eating these protein pucks, right? So we need to be manufacturing and sending in these protein alternatives and supplements for the world to be eating, instead of allowing people to have their own control over their food systems. There's not a lot of money in supporting indigenous farmers, peasant farmers, local food systems. There's no corporations benefiting from that. So there's not many people pushing back against them.
Sorry, I have to keep unmuting myself. Yeah, so Walter Willett, for those who don't know, is I guess, I don't know if he's a chair, or he's a senior scientist at Harvard, and he's been part of their public health, epidemiology department for decades now, and it's been pushing out a lot of the the rhetoric of plant-based diets, or mostly plant-based diets for sure. So again, we have these corporations, and we interviewed Frederick a few weeks back, and yeah, he's been a great source. I would say I had followed him on Twitter recently, except I've been permanently suspended from Twitter, so I'm unable to follow him currently, and so it's a little bit of censorship stuff going on. Hopefully
I'm trying to get him on
change.
Instagram, but I don't know.
Yeah.
He has a full-time job. He does all of this extra work just on the side.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I see that. So tell me about, so how do you foresee the global organization that you're trying to get going of impacting all of these, counteracting these forces of, I don't know if you want to call them evil, but forces of
The anti-meat forces.
dogma.
Yeah. I mean, it really is like religion, right? And pointing out that all these people who have dogmatic views on dietary patterns are like zealots. So we did just launch the website last week, which is globalfoodjustice.org. And I have an Instagram handle now, and I'm just starting with that. I did just send a letter this morning to the Secretary General of the United Nations, pointing out item by item why the Eat Lancet diet is not the solution for global hunger or the environment. And so if you guys want to read that and sign on to it, you can do that at globalfoodjustice.org. So I'm collecting signatures for that. And it really is a really good sort of piece by piece takedown of Eat Lancet and defense of meat. And beyond that, I am looking at doing a campaign where I'll be going around to different cities, hopefully starting with New York for the United Nations meeting in September, although they have not scheduled a date yet, and it's getting kind of close. So I'm not sure that it's actually going to happen in September, but if it does, I'm going to do my best to be there outside the doors, and handing out some samples and some information about why animal source foods are important. There's some other cities I'd like to hit as well, budget allowing for that. And so I do have some plans to be really noisy, and I have a PR agency behind me that thinks that they might be able to get some press for me, because I'm able to say things. So far, it's really just been industry defending themselves. But if the livestock industry says livestock's important and it can be done sustainably, nobody believes them, right? But I'm able to say things that industry can't say because I'm outside of industry, right? So I'm purely interested in public health and children's health, in women's health. I mean, there are places in the world where women can't own land, but they can own livestock, and it's really transformative for them. And so, in places where Heifer International has been able to give women goats or chickens, it's dramatically changed their lives. And so I don't understand why anyone would be against making sure that people had access to livestock, except for these corporations that stand to benefit. I see a note here. The film is not on Netflix. I did meet with Netflix, and it looked like for a while that they were going to make it a Netflix original. And then at the last minute, it was completely banned. Like nobody at Netflix wanted to touch it at all. Interestingly, Netflix, when you walk in there, it's very apparently very pro-vegan. I mean, even just looking at their cafeteria. Anyway, so you can get it on Amazon Prime and on iTunes. And then the book is on Amazon. So anyway, so I'm looking at doing all these stunts. I am working with some, grass-fed organizations. I've gotten funding just from individuals so far. And, it's interesting because I keep hearing the less meat, better meat movement, pushing back against me, where I say that meat is an important food to eat. And that even came up at AHS. There was a question from somebody saying that I wasn't talking enough about the benefits of grass-fed meat. And I know Shawn, you and I have talked about this before. So there's certainly, there can be good reasons to buy grass-fed meat. I advocate for that in the book and the film. But when we're talking about global food policy and feeding the world, livestock can turn a lot of things into meat, and not everybody has access to grass-fed meat. And nutritionally, there's just not a massive difference between grass-fed and typical meat. And so we have to stop this divide of, grass-fed being holier than thou and typical meat being poison.
Yeah, I've taken I've had a similar stance. I've taken a lot of flack for that. But I mean, again, I think the environmental argument, certainly you can make in a very compelling way. But the nutritional argument, I don't think is as sound, and the human health argument, it just hasn't panned out. We look at, animals like pigs who, people have coexisted with, and they've been human trash compactors, or, they've been basically animal trash compactors, and they just eat whatever you feed them. And that's one of their utilities around the house.
Yeah, they used to be part of the sewer system in New York City and in Paris. Like literally they were called garbage pigs, and they would go around eating human poop.
Interesting. And you'd eat them. That's, I guess there's people that are out there trying to figure out how to make us eat human poop directly, run it through some kind of reactor. But yeah, so that, and I think that topic is worth, looking at, because you're an RD, a registered dietitian, and you obviously are familiar with nutrition. And so when we compare, there are clearly differences, there can be differences between grass-finished beef and, sort of, I guess you want to say, grain-finished animals, but it's more than just, it's the breed of the animal, it's the age of the animal, it's the sex of the animal, it's the time of year the animal is slaughtered. And there's so many things that also impact that one way or the other. So it's not just a black and white thing. But what are the typical things that there are differences nutritionally that people point to, and why or why not does that not make a difference?
Okay, so in meat, in beef in particular, everyone will say, well, there's more omega-3s, and that's why you should eat grass-fed only. But if I were to make a pie chart of all the fatty acids in a steak, you would see both grass-finished and feedlot-finished beef have the same amount of saturated fat and monounsaturated fat, which is almost the entire pie. So it's a very, very small sliver that's polyunsaturated fats. And so in some studies, not all, they have shown that grass-finished beef has more omega-3s. They both have the same amount of omega-6. And so the ratio does change a little bit with grass-fed in some studies, but it's still such a small, puny percent. As a dietitian, it's like saying 2 pennies is twice as much money as 1 penny. But it's still not a lot of money, right? So you would still need to eat 8 pounds of grass-fed steak to get the same omega-3s you can get in a 3-ounce piece of salmon. So overall, as a dietitian, if I'm looking at someone's overall diet over a week, the best way to reduce your omega-6, the inflammatory fats, is to not eat processed foods, to not eat tofu, to not eat walnuts. And the best way to increase your omega-3s is to, pull some fish in, or just, even the ratio in meat can be just fine. If you're, doing a strict carnivore diet, depending on the cuts and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, they found that in the one biggest study that they did, they looked at 750 samples of grass-fed meat, and it really varied depending on the breed. So Wagyu beef was 1-to-1, but there were other breeds that were a 20-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to 3. So 20 omega-6 to 1 omega-3 in grass-finished beef. And environmentally, there's also a lot of nuance there too, because all cattle start out on pasture. That's just the way all cattle are raised. Some are finished on a feedlot, and some are finished on pasture. The ones on pasture take an extra year or so to go. So economically for farmers, that can be hard if you don't have really lush pastures. So even in the film that I did, the folks down in Mexico that are doing the regenerative grazing and saving the Chihuahua Desert, they send their cattle to feedlots to be finished. So they can still save the planet and make money at the same time by sending their animals to feedlots, and it just goes into the traditional system. But upcycling stuff we can't eat, like corn husks from the ethanol industry, pea hulls from the pea protein industry, that all goes into livestock feed. You know, only a small amount of the olives actually go into olive oil. The rest of that olive goes into livestock feed. And so if we didn't feed all of this stuff to livestock, it would have no other use in our food system. And it would just sit in a pile and emit greenhouse gases anyway. So I think there's always ways to improve things, but just saying, you know, plants are going to make you a cleaner person, so don't eat meat is just such a naive, simplistic reduction of like a very complicated question. And I'm just going to address this one question on here, because does that go for grass-fed versus conventional dairy? We do see more difference in grass-fed versus conventional dairy in nutrition. And that's because there's more fat in the dairy products. And it does translate directly to the milk. So if I were to tell you like how to spend your sort of dollar at the grocery store on like the better or worse, if you're going to buy something really lean, the differences are in the fats. And so if you're going to buy something like on the leaner side, it really isn't going to matter a whole lot as far as, you know, was it pasture raised or, you know, grain fed. Poultry, by the way, has a lot of omega-6, like way more than beef ever has. I've got a really great chart on that. Eggs, there's a huge difference in pasture raised eggs versus typical eggs, but even typical eggs, you're still going to get choline. You're still going to have lots of good benefits from that. So it really, you know, dairy, I do tend to buy grass-fed dairy products when I eat yogurt and things like that. There's still benefits, you know, for people who can tolerate it. Just conventional dairy is still fine. I've met with people that are, you know, living in their hundreds and have always just kind of had conventional cream. So there's no like evilness when it comes to these animal source foods. It's just some people tolerate dairy, some people don't, you know, all that kind of thing. Halal slaughter, just so you know about halal slaughter, it is an option. It's a different way of slaughtering. The animals are not rendered unconscious first. Their throats are just directly slit. So it's a choice, but it's not always easy to find, and has its own issues too. Anyway, I'm trying to like answer the questions.
And so I saw a question there from Stevens Wake, and he's you know, he's very much involved in you know, the food industry, and what he points out, you know, like Stefan Van Vliet's study out of Duke or Fred Prevent, they've looked at phytonutrients in meat, and they see a bigger difference between the way the animals are finished. However, we don't really have human data yet to show that makes a difference or not. I'm not
exactly.
You know, like I said,
so
I appreciate.
I mean, it's nice to know that maybe there's more phytonutrients, but we don't have a DRI for phytonutrients. We don't know how that makes a difference in the body. So I don't know that it's really going to be worth it. You know, if you're spending twice as much on grass finish just for some phytonutrients that we don't know anything about. So
yeah, I mean, hopefully, like I said, hopefully that data will come out, you know, and I like I said, I certainly, and I've said this many times, I certainly support the guys who are doing pasturing, you know, a certain way. And, you know, it's, you've pointed this out, it's not the cow, it's the how type of thing when it comes to the environment. And, you know, to some degree, and it is nuanced, because there can be hybrid systems where you know, the cow-calf operation can be very good with pasture management, and then they can still go to a feedlot, or you can hybridize certain cover crops, and some of it might be different plants. And so there's a lot of ways to solve this issue. You know, there's some people working on the other end with feed additives to reduce methane, but there are, so I mean, and I know you've talked about this and I've talked about this, but it always bears continuing to get this message out there, because it seems like you've said this thing 1,000 times and still there's a million people that haven't heard it yet. So water usage, I know you've got some great graphics on water use. We always hear, you know, gosh, if you eat a hamburger, it's like drinking 17 pools worth of water or some nonsense, you know, whatever, embellished crazy number. let's talk a little bit about water footprints, and then we can talk about some of these other environmental issues that are really misrepresented. So what about water?
Definitely. Yeah, water, feed use, greenhouse gases. Those are sort of some of the big ones, and land use. Those are the big ones. So when it comes to water, there's different ways of measuring water. So there's the water the cows are drinking that might come from blue water sources. So that's like when you look down at a map and you see the blue so it's lakes, it's aquifers, things like that. And then there's green water, which is the moisture that's already in the grasses. It's part of the water cycle. It's rain. It's stuff that's already existing in the environment, whether the cow is there or not. And so the majority of the water footprint, 94% for typical beef and 97% for grass-fed beef, is actually green water that's already there. So to compare that to flood irrigated almonds, which are being, watered from aquifers where companies have the rights to, where local people don't even have access to drinking water, but yet these towns are flood irrigating almonds and then exporting basically exporting our water. That's not fair. And it's funny that it's sort of, it's similar to the nutrition research, right? Where there's like issues, the science gets distorted when it gets reported and people are not looking at the methodology of how things are actually calculated. So same thing with observational studies can't prove cause, but the media grabs it and says meat causes cancer. Meat does not cause less water. Cattle are largely grazing on land that we can't crop to begin with and eating moisture that's there, but also returning moisture to the land.
Yeah, the thoughts on, again, you talk about greenhouse gases, and again, you've done a very nice job, putting it in a graphic image so people can see. And one of the arguments that, I had Frank Mittelaner on the other day, and we talk about, it's very important to have a perspective of what's going on in your particular region, what's going on in California, what's going on in the United States, what's going on in, this region versus, South America or Central Africa. But when it comes to the United States, how much of a problem relatively are cattle for greenhouse gas emissions?
Right. In the US, so they did a study on what it would look like if they removed all livestock from the US, and greenhouse gases would only go down 2.6%, but we would see an increase in overall calorie consumption. We'd see an increase in carbs, and we'd see an increase in nutrient deficiencies. So it would not be a good thing if we pulled livestock out. If you look at the chart that I have this bar graph available at sacredcow.info. If you pull down the resources tab, that's where you can find all the shareable graphics that we post on Instagram. And, transportation and energy production are by far the largest consumers or emitters of greenhouse gas. All of livestock is a very small percentage, and then cattle within that is between like 2 and 3% of greenhouse gas emissions in the US. So telling people that they should eat, one burger less a week or no meat at all is not really going to make much of a difference in greenhouse gas emissions, and could actually increase nutrient deficiencies. And, increasing protein is the trick I use, with some of my nutrition clients. I have used Carnivore with some of them, but even just increasing meat consumption and getting them more animal source protein overall will pull back the amount of calories that they're eating from other foods and fills them up, makes them feel happy, gives them all the nutrients they need. And so I don't see any benefits at all in telling people they should be eating less meat.
Yeah, and yet that's clearly the message coming out there. And I think there's obviously financial reasons for that message more than anything else. I don't think it's altruism to save the planet or improve people's health. I think it's clearly the bottom line. You know, and I'll reference again Stephen in here. He's always a good reference for me. But he mentioned that, you know, there's thought within the meat industry. You know, these major meat companies, Tyson,
Tyson.
Cargill, on and on. You know, with JBS and National Beef, or I think they're bought by Marfrig. But they are aligning themselves as alternate source protein companies. So they are investing in plant-based proteins, and they'll probably invest in synthetic lab meat. And the thought is that as the world population enlarges, as the overall wealth of the world increases, the desire for better and higher quality protein always seems to follow that. And so he's saying instead of being a replacement, it's going to be an additional source of protein. Is that what you see playing out, or do you see that we're going to see just they're going to try to eliminate cattle and totally take over certain parts of the world through regulation, taxation, trade agreements, on and on to really stick it to the ranch?
Yeah, I agree with you, Sean, with what you just said. And I think that there's a reason why, you know, some people think, oh, it's, you know, these crazy vegans trying to take away the meat. And then anyone who's sort of reasonable is like, well, that's ridiculous. No one's trying to take away the meat, right? And so they're trying to get sort of reasonable people on board with nobody's trying to take away the meat. But it's the flexitarians and the idea that you should necessarily eat less meat because of the environment, because of your health, and that these alternate protein sources are a suitable addition. They're not a suitable addition. They're not better than actual meat environmentally or nutritionally or ethically. But that is their messaging, right? There's a very carefully crafted message going on there. And so, you know, I think that the flexitarian movement is actually the biggest threat towards the people who are making the best meat, because they're the ones who can actually afford to be buying the grass-fed meat and all the more premium meat. And instead they're spending their dollars on Beyond Meat, which is twice as expensive, highly processed, and garbage food compared to real meat.
Yeah, and I agree. When you know, like I said, I do think it's more harmful. I mean, obviously, most people will never go vegan. I mean, as much as they pretend it's the greatest thing, you know, very few people can sustain that. You know, we see all kinds of health issues cropping up, and many of them, not all, some of them do okay on it, but I do think these, like Dr. Mark Hyman, you know, with his vegan diet, saying, you know, meat should be a tiny condiment. It should be just a little bit of flavoring, you know, and that message, because some people I think there's people more willing to do that than the other. And I think they do that at their own health detriment. And so I do agree this vegetarian, vegan, flexitarian movement is probably more worrisome than the vegan movement, because the vegan movement is associated with ideology and, you know, almost religious devotion, which a lot of people are turned off by. And so this is probably the more dangerous of the messaging. And the other thing is, you know, when people talk about Beyond Meat or Impossible Burger or whatever the other, you know, that other ones to come, or they're already out there, they say, well, why do vegans want their food to taste like and look like meat if they hate it? The target market is 95% to the omnivores. It's not the vegans are marketing to. So I think people have to realize that they're trying to get you to, you know, if they can convince you to give up meat 2 days a week and eat their Beyond Meat sludge, you're looking at a $300 billion market there just by doing that, and it won't make any difference to the environment. In fact, it'll probably make your health worse. But do you think most people are catching on to that, or is the marketing too good?
I think their marketing is really, really slick. I think this UN endorsement of the Eat Land Set diet, which is near vegan but not all the way vegan, it's this sort of vegan option, right, where there's just a little bit of meat, and of course we're not trying to get rid of all of your meat, but you know, that's actually the most dangerous. And yeah, I think that people are buying it. I think people, you know, it's back to like the Frederick Lalois stuff, where like people feel uncomfortable about how meat is raised. We don't know how it's raised. We don't like the idea of beautiful animals dying for us. And so Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods feels better to people who are urban and have never been to a ranch, or don't like these images that they see online of cow slaughter and things like that. We don't want to think about death. We don't want to think about our own deaths. I mean, only 20% of Americans have a will. And so like death is scary. We all try to cheat it. We all try to, have the best longevity ever. And we definitely don't want animals to die for us, especially in some of the conditions that are, being shown as standard. But what people don't understand is that death is part of life. All things die in order for other things to be born. There are issues in the meat industry that the meat industry should accept. There have been issues, but there's also issues in the plant industry too, right? Workers being exploited, child labor. We have major child labor issues and like human slavery happening in the US, mostly in the plant-based world, but we don't hear about that from the vegan movement. It's only about how beautiful cows and pigs are being slaughtered. So once we accept that the entire industrial food system needs an overhaul and that there's major problems everywhere within the industrial food system, let's just talk science and let's just talk nutrients. That's a hard thing because, as you said earlier, it is, quasi-religious, and people have their own biases and their own ideologies, and they don't want to hear science. So, people like Mark Hyman are really good politicians to be able to kind of like skirt all of that. But I think true scientists are actually the worst politicians because they're the ones who are willing to say things that are unpopular and just true and real.
Yeah, and there's a set, science is under attack in my view, and it's kind of the science rather than science, and there's a distinction between that, and so there's a belief that there's this consensus and we shouldn't have any further discussion, which is another topic. Let me ask you, so there's been a number of recent ballot initiatives or attempts at ballot initiatives being pushed about. They've become more and more emboldened with some things. You've got something in Colorado called the Pause Act, which was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And then there's an initiative, I think it's called Initiative 13 in Oregon right now, where they're trying to effectively outlaw animal agriculture through defining it as sexual molestation and raising the slaughter age to it has to die of natural causes before you can eat the animal. I guess the answer to that would be let them all run out in the field and a wolf will get them in about 6 months, and you'd increase this. The slaughter age would be much earlier than what we do when we raise them ourselves. But any thoughts on why that's happening? I mean, most of those obviously are not going to pass. In fact, I doubt any of them are going to be passed because they're so outrageous. But my thought is, it's kind of like they're trying to just raise awareness and trying to move the things incrementally. And I think that's what's happening. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, in Massachusetts a few years ago, I did some podcasts on this. We had a ballot that was, millions were spent on this by PETA to push this through. And it was banning, I'm trying to remember, it was question 3, and it was banning confined chicken operations in the state. But the thing is, we don't have any confined chicken operations in our state, right? But they were making this big, or maybe there was one that could kind of be called that, but they were making this big deal. And what they try to do is find a more liberal state to pass some of these outrageous laws in. So then there's precedent for when they go into California or Oregon to do this. So it's important that we get noisy and push back against those, because if they do even get a little bit in, like Direct Action Everywhere is considered a domestic terrorist group. They're the ones who are working with the city council of Berkeley to phase out meat, right? It's ridiculous what's happening. I can't believe it's happening. But now that it's happening there, you know, it'll be much easier for schools and hospitals to say that they're, you know, being healthier and better for environmental citizens by phasing out meat, pulling meat out of SNAP funding. WIC already doesn't have meat in, and for women, infants, and children, there's no meat in that. And so, you know, little things can happen when we have a lot of complacent meat eaters who don't understand how crazy even just a little foot in the door can be when it comes to some of these policy things.
Yeah, and I appreciate, you know, like the food justice, you know, you talking about, you know, how different cultures around the world, indigenous populations or different cultures, include meat in their diet. That's part of their culture. And, you know, when we talk about like the WIC program, so WIC program traditionally serves people that are basically impoverished, and for various reasons, we have a higher percentage of certain minorities that tend to fall in those poverty classes. And so you're basically nutritionally discriminating against those people by not allowing them to have access to the higher quality food. And that's something that maybe someone could point that out about the WIC program and say, or you know, if it's going to come to the SNAP program, say, look, you are going to be unfairly targeting certain minorities, which seems to get a lot of action and attention these days, and not that it shouldn't, but that's another thing that you know, you could leverage to say, look, if you're going to enact these food policies, you are going to further you know, sort of marginalize this already potentially marginalized population, particularly in the more impoverished regions.
Yeah, again, that's why I call this the Food Justice Alliance, is because I'm actually using their language to turn it back on them and show how, you know, this anti-meat rhetoric is actually like us colonizing other, you know, cultures with our, you know, idealized diet, which actually is a horrible diet. I mean, there's, I don't know if you've seen that igloo for the Inuit. So Canadian dietitians decided that they were going to make the Inuit healthier. They used a dietary igloo instead of a pyramid, and at the bottom is like orange juice and raisin bran and all kinds of things that are non-native to Canada and high in carbs and sugar. And then at the top in the red are all their traditional nutrient dense foods like goose and other wild meats. And so those are to be, you know, eaten sparingly. You know, that's basically just what we're doing to the rest of the world. But if we wanted to see, you know, just in one image, how horrible we can be with our elitism when it comes to food policy, it's that igloo.
Yeah, that is absurd. You know, you think about their historic population, and I've seen a number of people from different indigenous communities push back on this stuff and talk about how a plant-based diet is certainly not appropriate for their particular cultural situation. Mm-hmm. One of the things back at Eat Lancet Diet, you know, when that came out, you know, I saw, you know, pie chart breakdown, and you know, while they dramatically reduce red meat and meat in general, it's made some abysmally small amount. I would literally the allocation for a month, I would probably go through in a day very easily myself. And yeah. I say that without not even exaggerating. But one of the things that impressed me in a negative way was even the amount of fruit and vegetables they recommend was very, very small, and it was mostly grain. It was mostly a grain-based diet, and it was a lot of, you know, seed oils, and there was a lot of added. There's basically as much or more sugar than there was beef, which I thought was just absolutely
more sugar than beef for sure.
You know, so basically, I mean, it's basically the diet to make donuts with. I mean, it's basically the donut diet with a little bit of fruit and a tiny amount of meat. I mean, what did you notice that as well?
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. It's a ridiculous diet. It's untested. It was never tested on anybody, but yet this is going to be the endorsement for the world. And I see this one comment on here, you know, as Mexico has gotten wealthier, one of the things they've spent their money on is more beef. There actually was an article, and I can pull it up in a second, in The Economist, talking about as low and middle income countries have more access to money and more access to meat, they live longer, healthier lives. And there's only been one study that's been a randomized control trial looking at meat versus less meat. And it was done in kids in Kenya. And it was like a school snack supplement that they got. So one group got a meat snack, one group got milk, and one group got extra calories. And the meat group far outperformed all the other groups. So it was cognitive, behavioral, and physical. You know, so there's no studies at all showing that reducing meat in kids will lead to better health outcomes. I can't believe that Meatless Mondays is a thing. It's happening in New York City public schools. All New York City public schools offer free lunch because it's such a high percentage of kids that would qualify for it anyway. They just want to take the stigma away. So 70% of New York City public school kids are low income or homeless. And not only do they have no meat on Mondays, and, you know, of course they didn't replace it with like fresh garden salads and, you know, chickpeas, right? It's like mac and cheese, just like a cheeseburger without the burger in the middle, as if that's better. But they also have this horrible propaganda that they put all over the schools about how, you know, not eating your burger will save 10 bathtubs full of water, that you're going to reduce your chance of getting diabetes by 15% if you just eat beans instead of meat for one meal a week. It, like, just ridiculous messaging, but it's all over the schools, starting in kindergarten to all the kids in New York City public schools. It's propaganda.
Yeah. I mean, certainly that's there, and you know, like I said, it's kind of frustrating to see why that's being allowed to be done, and you know, you see, I mean, obviously cutting. I mean, the meat they were serving in the schools in the first place probably wasn't the best stuff anyway. It was chicken nuggets and pizza with, you know, pepperoni pizza, and you know, I remember when I went to school, it wasn't like you were getting grass-finished steaks or even nice steaks. I mean, you were getting relatively cheap stuff. I mean, although the ground beef would be okay, I think, in most cases.
I think the ground beef it's just beef and salt. Like even a McDonald's burger is just beef and salt. And so, you know, I would say that that's the best choice on the menu compared to a lot of the other, you know, ones that don't have meat in them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I've eaten my share of beef patties, and I think they're a completely normal health food. So the film? Have you gotten much feedback on the film? Has there anything? Did you accomplish what you wanted to accomplish with the film, do you think, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just got my Q2 statement. It was $2,000. Q1 was $2,000. It'll probably be downhill from there. So unfortunately, it was 4 years of work. Similar with the book, I think Rob and I were saying, I was just out in Montana visiting him. He's trying to get me to move to Kalispell, which I'm slightly tempted. But I think we have the highest ratio of 5-star reviews to low book sales possible. It's like pretty abysmal. You know, we've released during a pandemic, but I wasn't able to I used to work at NPR, and I was not able to get any of my friends to pick up Sacred Cow. I wasn't able to get any press at all. I got more press for my cookbooks than I did for the Sacred Cow book. It has, you know, the book and film, science teachers are psyched about it. Master's degree students in livestock science are psyched about it. I'm hoping that it's shown in schools as a counterpoint when they show films like Cowspiracy, because that was my intention with it. So I never intended it for it to be some big, you know, Netflix blockbuster. That's why it's not me driving around in a blue van, like trying to discover you know, I don't do cheesy stuff like that. But it has been, you know, one of the things I was looking forward to with the film release was I was invited to 15 different countries to screen it, and then COVID happened. So unfortunately that, you know, is a bummer. So it's been mostly just virtual screenings. but I'm hoping with this Global Food Justice Alliance, it seems that there's a lot of people that want someone to defend meat, and I'm willing to do it. And so, that plus just moving forward, my nutrition consulting is what I'm going to focus on for now.
Yeah, I said, so Robb moved from Texas up to Montana now. Is that where he's now hanging his hat? Okay. I didn't
Yeah. He lives on a little pond, like lake thing in Kalispell, beautiful, right near Glacier National Park. It's really great. I was just out there.
Good. Well, I'm up in Washington State now for the at least next several years, and so I'm kind of in that part of the world. So maybe I'll have to drive out that way. It's not too far away from me.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can get something else in here before we have to go. What other information would you like to share with folks that maybe they're not aware of right now?
Just, try to learn the arguments as well as you can. If you understand the nutrition argument, try to wrap your head as much as you can around the environmental argument. My book does a really good job of explaining it in a really sort of linear way. The film is just like a bunch of farm visits. It's very different than the book, which is, really a good arguments with lots of citations. I think we need more people, like the nutrition argument's easy. The ethical argument, you're never going to win with an ethical vegan, right? But it's the environmental argument for why livestock matter that I think needs more airtime and more consumers being able to regurgitate it to other consumers. And I definitely am noticing that make meat eating sexy. I'm definitely noticing that even my followers on Instagram are able, like, I don't have to go into the comments as much anymore because when someone says, yeah, but the water, I have my own folks in there now able to, back me up on water and land use and all that kind of stuff. So I think that would be a really great help to me, would be just more advocates on my Instagram feed so that I don't have to spend as much time on there fighting, and I can just move forward. So, and then I do have a Patreon page, and I'll put a little plug in for that on Global Food Justice Alliance.
Yeah, that's one thing I've seen, because I've been obviously beating this drum about the helpfulness of meat for many years now. And, I've got, when I look in my comments, when I dare to go in there, I often see people that are able to, defend against the people that are in the naysayers. But, and then the question is, how much reach do you actually have? Social media, obviously it amplifies what you can say, but I still think, I literally was suspended permanently from Twitter for supposedly 2 videos that had music in them that was copyrighted a couple of years ago. I mean, obviously that's selective enforcement. And, it's kind of funny. Joe Rogan messaged me and said, hey man, are you still suspended? I told him yes and why. And he said, that's total BS. And I asked him, when are they going to cancel you, Joe? Because he's out there putting up some controversial stuff. And he said, that's a good question, because I think he realizes that.
You could call Joe for me. I flew out to Austin and got stuck in the ice storms and was supposed to be on Joe Rogan's show, and then he never rescheduled. And I spent a week in a hotel with no running or drinking water. So
goodness. Well, next time I talk to him, I'll have to mention that. But, yeah, interesting. Yeah, because he's obviously got a big voice, and he's obviously a proponent of meat, and I think that's good to have someone like that in the corner. But there's a lot of money. I think Frederick Lavoie, as we mentioned earlier, pointed out there's something like $5.5 trillion of capital assets that are trying to develop this fake meat market and push this processed food diet forward. And so that's a lot of money to that's a lot. That's not a chump change. $5.5 trillion is a lot of money to get that stuff. Okay, so just tell us again where. Because people wanting to order the book and support you further and watch the film. I hope it stimulates a little bit of that, so they can help you out a little bit. Yeah. It is. I mean, honestly, it's a really good movie, and it's a great book, and I think it. And I think if you want to continue to eat meat, you need to be able to intelligently make an argument, because unfortunately it's come to that. It's no longer, and I think the beef industry is starting to realize that while the product essentially sold itself for for 3 million years, right? now it's having to compete with this tremendous propaganda, and so they have to. And so I'll tell you, there's a guy in the dairy industry. He goes by the Iowa Dairy Farmer. Dan Ventiker, who I've had on. He does a tremendous job in debunking some of the vegan propaganda, and he does it in a very matter-of-fact, factual way. And what he's doing is he's getting literally shut down on social media for that, because they're massively reporting him and complaining that he is putting out information they don't like. And so it's something that is very, very difficult to see. But hopefully more and more ranchers and farmers will stand up. And I mean, as you know, those guys are working hard. They don't have time to spend all day on social media like some other folks do. But some of them are doing that, and I think that's important. So where do we find you? Where do we find your book? Where do we find your movie? How do we support the global food justice? What's the last letter word on there? Is Alliance or
Global Food Justice Alliance?
Alliance. Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
Global
thank
Food
you.
Justice.
Thanks. Shawn, thank you for every time I message you being up for either giving me advice or supporting whatever I do. So I just thank you for that.
Sure. Keep doing what you're doing. We need people like you to do it.
Thanks. So it's globalfoodjustice.org. It's on Instagram at Global Food Justice. And Sustainable Dish is my handle on Instagram, my other handle, and my website. And then it's sacredcow.info. I have lots of things going on, is all the Sacred Cow stuff. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to go follow Global Food Justice on Instagram, and I'll look forward to some posts talking about the Justice Act aspect of it, because I think that will gain some. It's another angle that we can use to.
I think it's the one. I really do. Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Okay.
All right, guys. Have a great day. Thanks, Diana. We'll look forward to talking to you down the road, I'm sure. And you guys have a great day. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Bye-bye, guys. Take care.